Cinderella, Snow White, Tangled. We can probably all think of at least one story that leans into the whole evil stepmother thing. It's a stereotype that shows up in movies and fairy tales, but also, more often than we'd like to admit, in real-life family dynamics. But what if we gave that old trope a twist? What if a stepmother's love for her stepchildren was stronger than her love for their father? It actually sounds kind of sweet, right? A stepmother who steps up, goes all in, and loves the kids like they're her own. That's the dream. But is it possible for that love to go too far? So far that it becomes a little unsettling, even dangerous, even enough to create tension between the U.S. and Ireland. Hey, Crime Salad listeners. So today we will be taking a closer look at what happens when a loving father, also husband, begins to look more like an obstacle to the happily ever after his new wife dreams of. Now, unfortunately, the man at the center of today's case, Jason Corbett, he can no longer share his side of things. As Alan Martin, an assistant district attorney, put it, Jason's statement died with him. Jason's statement is on the carpet and on the walls of Panther Creek Court. However, Jason's family has been incredibly vocal about speaking on his behalf, especially his sister Tracey Corbett and his daughter Sarah Corbett. Though she was only 8 years old on the day her father was murdered, as Sarah Corbett has grown into her own voice, she uses it to share her side of the story. At 18 years old, Sarah published her second book, a memoir, detailing her experience titled A Time for Truth, My Father Jason in My Search for Justice, on March 18, 2025. By sharing their insights and perspectives on the years leading up to the tragedy we'll be covering today, we've been able to gain a better understanding of the case through those who have been most impacted by the violent tragedy that destroyed an entire family. Now, before we can dive into the details we gathered, though, we must warn you that today's episode includes discussions of domestic violence, mental health issues, and a violent murder. So if you're sensitive whenever it comes to any of these topics, you may want to skip this episode and tune in next week instead. I'm Ashley, and this is Crime Salad. So let's go way back to when Jason Corbett's story all began, which started in Ireland. Jason Corbett was born into a big family, an upbringing that his sister Tracey Corbett recalls as being traditionally Irish, with summers spent fishing in Spanish Port, a village on the west coast of Ireland. Tracey has described her brother as being a kind person with a caring soul, a boy who raised in Limerick, which is known in part for its impressive castles, and he grew into a man who was gifted his own fairy tale-like reality when he met Margaret Fitzpatrick, who he would go on to marry in 2003. In her memoir, Sarah Corbett explains that her father enjoyed showing his children videos of their mother as they got older, and she shares that one of her favorite clips is of her mother Margaret getting ready on her wedding day. She wrote, "She has natural warmth and grace. Her smile is sweet, reaching her hazel eyes. She looks so beautiful and radiant, a fleeting dream from the past. The world must have seemed so full of promise for her that day." On September 18th, Margaret, often referred to as Mags, gave birth to the couple's first child, Jack Corbett. Just 2 years later, Sarah was born on September 2nd, 2006. After the birth of their daughter, Tracey remembers the happy couple saying, their family was complete. They had their little prince and their princess. Unfortunately, there was an ever-present threat lingering over Mags. Having suffered with asthma throughout her life, Mags relied on her inhalers and nebulizer to save her when she wasn't feeling well. But just 12 weeks after her daughter was born, Mags suffered from an asthma attack that was so severe that nothing seemed to help, despite Mags using both her inhalers and the nebulizer. Recognizing the severity of the situation, Jason called an ambulance and woke up Mags' sister, Catherine, who was living in the house with Jason and Mags at the time. He then put Mags in the car, rushing to meet up with the ambulance in a desperate attempt to get her life-saving medical treatment. Sadly, Jason's efforts wouldn't be enough to save his wife. Mags died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital on November 21st, 2006, when she was only 31 years old. Years later, Mags's family would release a statement sharing their heartbreak over the loss of the young woman who they considered to be the rock of the family, describing Mags as a great daughter, wonderful sister, loyal friend, and a loving wife and mother. Despite acknowledging that they will always miss Mags, they have confirmed that Jason did everything he could to save the person he absolutely adored and expressed their gratitude for Jason's efforts to save her. Now, following Mags's death, Jason was left to face with this unexpected challenge of being a 30-year-old widow with 2 children to raise on his own and work at the same time. I suspect most parents would agree that taking care of a 2-year-old and a 12-week-old daughter isn't exactly easy, especially as a single grieving father. But a year and a half later, everything seemed to change for the dad of the 2 kids when Molly Martens came into the picture. It seemed like the kids were really drawn to her. They connected almost instantly. And it wasn't long before her love for the children grew to touch Jason as well. Now, you may be wondering how they met. So Jason posted on an au pair website as he was a single dad looking for a caregiver for his kids. And Molly, who was devastated with a recent miscarriage and a relationship that wasn't working out, took on the opportunity to connect with Jason. Everything seemed to work out, so she flew into Ireland. And really, from that moment on, it felt like it was a great fit. So much so that the children fell in love with her. And also, Jason started to fall in love with her too. So I guess you could say she filled this void that was missing in their family. But with proof in emails written from Jason to Molly, he shows reluctance to rush into this relationship because the kids have already been through so much losing their mother. He just doesn't want to risk them getting too attached and something not working out down the road. But at the same time, Jason's sister Tracey remembers seeing a little glimpse of the old Jason coming back as some of his sadness faded. Jason and Molly's relationship went from professional to romantic, a transition that seemed to bring happiness to Jason, Molly, Jack, and Sarah, something the family observed during a holiday they all took together. And so, on Valentine's Day in 2010, Jason proposed to Molly, cementing their future as a promising second chance for romance and happiness following Margaret's tragic death. Jason never forgot about Mags, and he made sure that his children didn't forget their mother either. Along with showing Jack and Sarah videos of their mother, he also started a tradition of releasing balloons with his children on the anniversary of Mags's death, and kept a suitcase of her things, which Sarah held close even after all these years. In an interview with Pat Kenny on News Talk earlier this year, Sarah said that she still wears her mother's clothes and feels like she has a sense of Mags, thanks to her father keeping those ties to Margaret. However, Sarah has also shared memories that seem to illustrate how Jason made space in his heart and home to welcome Molly into the family as well, writing in her memoir that he wanted Molly to be happy, especially since by the time the couple got engaged, Jack and Sarah had grown to see Molly as their mother, even calling her mom. So when Molly became homesick, Jason even went so far as to move his family from Ireland to the United States in April of 2011. Sarah, who was 4 years old at the time, remembers seeing their new home in North Carolina for the first time, writing that the rounded tower at the side of the house reminded her of a fairy tale turret. Her father, who always called her a princess, promised Sarah her new room would soon have a big princess bed and a princess dressing table in it. The fairy tale that seemed destined to end in tragedy when Mags died glimmered with new hope of a lighter future. But it wasn't long before little signs would begin to foreshadow the dark twists that would eventually ruin everything. According to Tracey, though Jason's family initially supported the marriage, during their visit to the United States meant to celebrate the couple's wedding, they began to notice concerning changes in Molly. Tracey has said that during this time when the bride was expected to be happy and excited, Molly was controlling, angry, and avoided socializing. What really stood out in Tracey's mind, though, was when one of the bridesmaids shared that Molly had told her that she was friends with Mags before Mags died. Why even make that up? And that's not the only story she fabricated. She started telling people that she gave birth to Sarah, but that wasn't true. And also that she had this sister who died of cancer. And later, that story was revealed to be not true. She made the story up about a sister that never existed. But at the same time, Molly appeared to be a loving stepmother who adored Jack and Sarah as if they were her biological children, and would still state to this day that she was the primary caretaker. She was even going so far as to wanting to adopt the children as her own because her belief was she was their mother, and this became so real. Sarah would eventually go on to share that the relationship Molly had with her stepchildren had taken on a darker undertone behind closed doors, one that would put the children into a manipulated state where they wanted to be with Molly more than their own dad. Sarah has admitted that when she was just 5 years old, Molly started to tell her that her father had killed her birth mother. Molly would even make her dad believe that the way she died was suspicious, and she believed Mags was strangled. And Molly thought that she could be the next victim in this situation, and she also reported that he has tried to choke her before. On a separate occasion, Tom also mentioned that he spoke to Mags's father, and he too stated that he thinks there was just no way she could have died from asthma. Mags's mother, on the other hand, referred to Jason as a warm and caring person and stating, "We know how much Jason loved and adored our Mags. We hope the facts and truth will speak for themselves, and no amount of lies will tarnish the love Jason and Mags had for one another." And even though Mags's father has now passed away from cancer, Mags's family finds it really hard to believe that he would have such a thing to say, especially when a legal statement that was signed by Michael Fitzpatrick, Mags's father, that he only met Tom once and never spoke of his daughter, Margaret. And it was clearly written in the statement that he didn't inform Thomas Martens that he believed John had killed Margaret. This might have been another fabrication. However, Molly was the only mother that Sarah had any firsthand memories of at the time. And being so young, she didn't know how to react. She remembers that certain things that Molly did back then felt wrong to her, but it became her normal, as she didn't know anything different. Playing such an important role in the children's lives while they were so young allowed Molly to significantly influence Jack and Sarah. Punishments reinforced their obedience to their stepmother, as Sarah explains, with the children learning to keep certain things from their father to avoid setting off another one of Molly's hysterical outbursts, or another night without dinner. Molly seemed to be trying to turn Jack and Sarah against their father, telling Sarah that Jason was a bad father and a bad husband. At the same time, Molly was actively trying to convince Jason to allow her to adopt Jack and Sarah, something that likely would have been an expected next step following the couple's marriage. Rather than following the typical trope of being the type of evil stepmother who schemes to get rid of her stepchildren, desiring a relationship solely with their father, it seems that Molly cared more about Jack and Sarah than Jason and loved them as if they were her own. At least, that's what it seemed like. And Molly would later go on to tell Alex Ronan in an interview for Elle that she found purpose in taking care of Jack and Sarah. But after consulting a divorce lawyer to figure out what her rights were to Jack and Sarah, she learned that without Jason's signature on those adoption papers, Molly's role in the children's lives came with no legal backing. Molly alleges that even though Jason was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive throughout their marriage, her love for her stepchildren kept her from leaving him. Despite Molly's claims that Jason was an abusive, violent, dangerous person, and her attempts to convince the children that their father was a bad man, Sarah insists that this version of the family's life in North Carolina isn't true. Sarah remembers her father as being a kind and gentle, family-oriented man who brought flowers home for Molly, got involved in the children's sports teams to make them feel more comfortable, and loved spending time with the family. Though it seems pretty clear to me, at least, that Molly did her best to pull Jason's children away from him. And it seems like her efforts ultimately were in vain. Jack and Sarah may not have spoken out against Molly at the time, but their love for their father remained. Jason also resisted Molly's attempts to convince him to allow her to adopt the children. He had already designated Tracey and her husband David Lynch to be the children's legal guardians if something were to happen years beforehand. New suspicions regarding Molly, paired with the desire for Jack and Sarah to return to Ireland in the event of his death, made this a stance that couldn't be swayed. With cracks beginning to show under the rising pressure, the fairy tale facade would completely shatter on August 2nd, 2015, when Jason and Molly's marriage ended in murder. When recounting the night that changed her whole life, Sarah recalls Molly giving her tablets before sending her off to bed. At only 8 years old at the time, Sarah has never been able to pinpoint exactly what these tablets were. Yet, as an adult, Sarah has come to suspect that she was drugged, and later that evening, she woke up feeling dizzy, sick, terrified, and hallucinating spiders and lizards crawling all over her bed, something that she has never experienced before. After finally falling back asleep, Sarah was later woken up a second time by a towering, shadowy, bald stranger standing by her bed. This time, the shadowy figure wasn't a hallucination or the result of a lingering nightmare. Sadly, the horrors that unraveled in Sarah's home that night were all too real. In her memoir, Sarah recalls that Corporal Clayton Stewart Dagenhart was kind and soft-spoken as he convinced her to go with him. Doing his best to shield her from the gruesome crime scene that he was responding to, he told her to walk backwards and keep her eyes shut as he led her out of her bedroom and towards the stairs. When she hesitated at the top of the stairs, Officer Dagenhart offered to carry her, a kindness that Sarah accepted. Shielding the young girl's face with his hand, Officer Dagenhart carried Sarah down to a bedroom in the basement that was supposed to be occupied by Molly's parents, Thomas and Sharon Martens, that night. Both the children were left down in the basement to wait and wonder in that room, as Sharon was also there, calmly reading her book while red and blue lights flashed through the night. Given the gravity of the crime, it was impossible to keep the truth from Jack and Sarah forever. With Jason unable to share his side of the tragedy that took place that night, the only perspective we have is that of two people who have admitted to killing him. During police interviews that happened hours after Officer Dagenhart entered the family's home, Tom and Molly told Davidson County Sheriff's investigators their version of what happened that night. Now, you may be wondering, why is Molly's parents at the house? So Tom and his wife were staying over. They were staying downstairs. It's believed that Jason and Molly were having a heated patch in their marriage, so Molly's parents agreed to stay over. Tom even canceled a business meeting with his boss to make this arrangement. Now, no doubt Molly's parents were in a protective mode for their daughter throughout their visit, eager to intervene if they had to, even to help with the kids or to lessen the arguments. That night, according to Tom Martens, Jason seemed reportedly drunk by the time he and Sharon arrived at the house to visit the family that evening. Still, everything went smoothly right up until Sarah's terror woke Jason up and ultimately led to a fight between Molly and Jason after Sarah had gone back to sleep. Molly has claimed that fights with her husband often escalated, with Jason frequently becoming violent and abusive towards her. She told investigators that during the argument that night, Jason got so heated that he started choking his wife. As Jason's hands tightened around her throat, Molly feared for her life. The volatile argument between Jason and Molly was apparently loud enough to wake Molly's father, Tom, up. Tom, a former FBI agent, grabbed the Little League baseball bat he had brought as a gift for the kids, and he went to investigate. When he reached the couple's bedroom, Tom explained that he found Jason choking Molly and threatening to kill her. Acting on his protective fatherly instincts, Tom didn't hesitate to intervene. According to Tom and Molly, Tom went after Jason with the baseball bat, causing Jason to release his chokehold on Molly and turn his rage to her father instead. Tom fought back, but Jason grabbed the bat and pushed him to the floor, knocking Tom's glasses off in the process. Fearing that Jason was going to kill her father, Molly grabbed a paving stone that she had left out on her nightstand as a future art project for the kids and hit Jason on the head with it. Tom regained control of the bat and used it to beat his son-in-law until Jason was a battered, bloody, lifeless mess. As Jason's broken body bleeding out on the bedroom floor, Tom called 911 around 3 a.m. that day to report the carnage, telling the dispatcher that he had intervened in a fight between his son-in-law and his daughter and admitted that he may have killed him. Jason was unresponsive by the time help arrived and was pronounced dead on August 2nd, 2015. Both Molly and Tom claim that they did what they had to do to defend themselves from Jason's aggressive rage that night. However, Molly and Tom would also both leave the room after that altercation physically unharmed. Jason, on the other hand, wouldn't be so lucky. An autopsy later revealed that Jason's skull had been crushed during the attack, with his head having been struck at least a dozen times. And the condition of his body was so horrific, it was reported that the medical examiner, when he was brought to be examined, a chunk of his skull fell out on the table. In her memoir, Sarah shares that though she hasn't seen the photos taken of the crime scene, she now knows that investigators documented blood on the walls, floor, bed, and hallway. Yet despite having just taken part in such a brutal attack against Sarah and Jack's father, Molly still seems to hold onto her desire to remain in the children's lives as their mother. After admitting to investigator Wanda Thompson that she was scared that Jason's family would take the kids following his death, Molly cried when she was told that her fears were a real possibility. But there was reason for Molly to hold onto hope, as Thompson assured Molly that it looked like Jason's death was going to fall under self-defense. At the time, even statements made by Jason's children seemed to confirm this. However, Sarah has since gone on to expose the manipulative attempts to hide the truth that unfolded behind closed doors. Molly wasted no time in filing for custody of Jack and Sarah after Jason was killed. Like, we're talking 48 hours after his death. Jack and Sarah were placed in the Martens family care for 2 weeks after their father's death, an experience that Sarah has described as weird, recalling how Molly and her family acted like nothing bad happened. As the Martens enjoyed things like barbecues and a beach day, Sarah struggled to comprehend the fact that her father was now dead. But this unsettling approach of ignoring the immense grief that the children were grappling with so soon after losing their father wasn't the only shadowy aspect of the siblings' time with the Martens. Jack and Sarah have since both accused Molly of manipulating them before they were interviewed by professionals about the family's dynamics leading up to Jason's death. They've explained that Molly lied to them about their father and told them that if they didn't repeat these lies during their interviews, they would be taken away, never allowed to see each other again. Having lost both of their biological mother and now their father, 10-year-old Jack and 8-year-old Sarah were now orphans, facing the threat of possibly being separated from the only mother they could truly remember. And so the children confirmed Molly's allegations. Jack even told a social worker that he had seen his father punch, hit, and push Molly. And Sarah was told by Molly that her dad isn't a good dad or a good husband. But her influence over the children wouldn't go unchecked for long. When Tracey was told about her brother's horrific death, she immediately flew to North Carolina and filed for custody of Jack and Sarah. It was a battle that Tracey and her husband ultimately won, which meant that the couple could finally take the children back home to Ireland to be raised alongside their 2 sons. In Ireland, Tracey made sure that Jack and Sarah received intensive therapy to help them begin the healing process, surrounded by the love of a supportive family. Meanwhile, Molly began posting Facebook messages to the children, which often included her phone number and email address, as a last-ditch effort to stay in contact with them. One example of the intense feelings she shared is a post from December 8th of 2015 that says, "I will never stop loving you. I am sorry that we do not share our genetics. We share our lives, and I was the person chosen to be your mom. I was the person you called mom for 8 years. You will always be my children. You are my heart and soul." But soon enough, Molly would have more pressing concerns to worry about. In January of 2016, Molly Corbett and Thomas Martens were charged with second-degree murder 5 months after Jason's death. Many people have shared a wide range of perspectives, speculations, and statements throughout this investigation and prosecution of this case. Jason's friends and family members, including his son-in-laws from his first marriage, have insisted that the allegations of abuse against Jason are complete lies. They argue that Jason, not Molly, was the victim of domestic violence at the hands of an abuser who ultimately stole his life. Meanwhile, those closest to Molly have spoken up in her defense, including her mother. When asked about Molly and Jason's marriage, Sharon said that their relationship was horrible, claiming that though Molly wouldn't talk about it, Jack and Sarah had told her about Jason abusing her daughter. A couple of people from Molly's past have also come forward, including a former friend who has described Molly as a pathological liar, and also her ex-fiancé, Keith, that Molly left behind to start a new life in Ireland. Keith published a book in December of 2012 that exposes details of his traumatic relationship with Molly. He also shared his perspective on the case, stating, quote, "I know firsthand how tumultuous it was to be in a relationship with her. Desperate people go to desperate measures. It sounds like they were trying to stain his name to cast any doubt to buy their own freedom." Jack and Sarah, they also turned against Molly 9 months after leaving the United States to start a new chapter of their life in Ireland. Jack recanted the statements he had made to the social workers. He insisted that his father wasn't abusive and that he had lied under the pressure of Molly's manipulation. Both Jack and Molly have stood firm on this stance ever since, speaking on behalf of their father to share the true nature of the man that has been loved and missed by so many. However, according to the prosecutor, Alan Martin, it was the excessive violence and viciousness of the injuries inflicted upon Jason that was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Defending yourself from an attacker is one thing. What Thomas and Molly did to Jason, it seems only natural to argue that their attack on Jason was overkill. Not only did Jason suffer from at least 12 blows to the head, but the forensic pathologist also stated that the degree of skull fractures in this case are the types of injuries that we may see in falls from great heights or car crashes. The prosecution didn't hold back on showing the jury exactly how gruesome the crime scene was either. One juror even vomited at seeing a picture of Jason's battered skull. Pictures were also taken of Molly and Thomas that night, and the only sign of a potential physical altercation was a red mark right underneath her ear that looked to be like a nail dig. Their lack of physical injuries creates a stark contrast that effectively called Molly and Thomas's self-defense claims into question. Prosecutors backed their case with additional evidence against Molly and Thomas's self-defense argument, including the fact that paramedics found Jason's temperature to be suspiciously low by the time they arrived on the scene. A toxicology report recorded that his blood alcohol level was just 0.02%, which is interesting because Molly's dad did say during the interview that he was extremely intoxicated. However, the prosecution stated that in the state of North Carolina, it is still considered legal with this amount of alcohol in your system to drive a vehicle. Now, there was something else. Traces of trazodone, a powerful sedative, was detected in his bloodstream. And here's the thing about that. Jason had never been prescribed trazodone. This was actually Molly's prescription. Molly had been given a trazodone prescription shortly before the night Jason was killed. Molly and Thomas stuck to their story, insisting that Jason had abused Molly throughout their marriage until the night that Molly's father intervened. Thomas was simply a father trying to protect his daughter from a dangerous abuser. And, of course, his daughter was trying to protect him in return. After a trial that lasted 9 days, the jury deliberated for just 3 hours before returning with a verdict. Molly Corbett and Thomas Martens were found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 to 25 years in prison. But just when you think that this is all said and done, just 1 year later, the defense turned to the appellate court to argue that numerous errors had been made during the trial. One was how the grandma, Molly's mom, Sharon Martens, came up with this code word for the kids. She wrote her number underneath something like a doll in their room so that they can have access to it when their dad would ever start yelling or they needed help. They can call her. Jack's code word was Galaxy and Sarah's was Peacock, and she would drive to the house from Tennessee. This and other things resulted in the appellate court overturning the verdict, and the prosecution brought the fight to the North Carolina Supreme Court in March of 2021, and so a new trial was ordered for Molly and Tom. Molly was fighting that this was domestic abuse. She was fighting to adopt the kids, as this was an ongoing argument back and forth that he kept hitting the brakes, being that adoption means in the event of divorce, there's custody, and he didn't want to lose the kids, while she believed that she was in the position to be the adoptive mother. She was also worried that she would have been murdered just as she had thought Mags had died. The defense looked into this and hired an expert. And according to that autopsy report that the expert reviewed, Mags appeared to have possibly died by strangulation, explaining that sometimes victims of manual strangulation don't die right away, but could have injuries that are severe enough to block natural breathing. And in this case, this is what is now believed to have actually happened to Mags years ago, even though there wasn't any marks on the outside of her neck or anything that would prove strangulation. So allegedly, Molly was scared for her life. She was being abused, and this murder was an act of self-defense. Her father, who was in the house, heard the ruckus, came in the room with a bat to fight off the abuser. While on the other side of things, the two children were now old enough to testify. They felt confident to tell the jury the actual truth, that they lied in their original interviews. They were being manipulated by Molly. They were fed these thoughts that their father was this horrible person. And when looking at the big picture, was Molly doing this purposefully to try to gain full custody of the children? In her memoir, Sarah tells readers about the beautiful September day in 2023 when a fun sleepover with her friend was interrupted by Tracey's insistence that the family needed to be together. They needed to talk. She recalls being instantly winded, unable to breathe as Tracey held her hand and told her that Molly and Tom had agreed to a plea deal that would reduce the charges against them to voluntary manslaughter. Sarah cried all night, outraged at how the legal system had betrayed them. Molly pled no contest to voluntary manslaughter, allowing her to accept punishment for the charge without having to admit to or denying committing the crime. In her statement to the judge, Molly continued to lean into the role of a victim, claiming, "I did the best I could as a human. As a daughter, I tried to save my father from almost certain death." Thomas Martens seemed to be more willing to accept at least some accountability for the actions that led to Jason's death. He pled guilty to manslaughter and stated, "After review of the evidence in this case, I now realize my actions were excessive and in violation of the law. Maybe a better man could have produced a better result, but I did the best I could." Molly and Thomas were both given a 7 to 30-month sentence on top of the 44 months they had already served by then. So in June of 2024, Molly and Thomas were released after spending 4 years and 3 months behind bars. On the day that Molly and Thomas were sentenced, the judge admitted that despite clinging to every detail that was presented to him, he did not know what truly happened in this case. He went on to address Jack and Sarah directly, stating, "Irrespective of what I find or what went on, they are blameless completely. They are blameless in any statements they made then or now. It is imperfect as the law is imperfect. I am glad that the young lady Sarah will now be a part of it. She is now taking a law degree, hopefully to make it more perfect. I think that's a great note to end today's episode on, acknowledging the true sorrow and pain that Sarah, Jack, and all of Jason's loved ones had to suffer through in the years following his death, while also admiring the strength they've demonstrated in continuing to move forward. According to Sarah, Jack has gone on to study music in college as a singer-songwriter, while Sarah continues to share her story boldly, stating, "I've written my truth now. I've listened to Molly my entire life. I don't have to listen to her lies anymore." We hope you'll take a moment to use your voice and reach to share this episode with the people in your circle, spreading awareness of a case that offers glimmering of inspiration and hope among the darker details. As always, we're so grateful for our Crime Salad Patreon and Apple subscribers. Your support means the world to us and allows us to keep this podcast going. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. We appreciate this opportunity to share what we learn about these cases with all of you and hopefully kickstart important conversations. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you next week for another deep dive into the stories that need to be told.